Winter had a way of making people disappear. It swallowed color, softened edges, and turned faces into hunched, shivering shapes that no one looked at for too long. At the edge of a busy highway, a lonely rest stop sat under a sky the color of bruised steel, its neon signs flickering in tired blues and reds that did little against the creeping dark and the biting cold. Somewhere between the trash cans and the farthest fuel pump, an 11-year-old girl moved like a ghost no one had invited. Maya's faded gray hoodie was 2 sizes too big, swallowing her thin frame, sleeves soaked at the cuffs and stiff with cold. Her stomach ached with the familiar dull twist of hunger, but she tried to ignore it and focus on the mission she had given herself. Find something edible before the cold dug so deep into her bones that she couldn't feel her fingers anymore. The world had taught her to be invisible. Keep your head down. Move fast. Disappear when grown-ups get loud. That night, the world decided to get loud in a different way. At first, it was just a tremor under the noise of traffic, a distant rumble that made the paper cups on the sidewalk vibrate. Then the sound thickened and rolled in like thunder over asphalt. Deep, synchronized, unmistakable. Motorcycle engines, a whole pack of them, coming in hard. Customers at the pumps glanced up, some with curiosity, some with the wary discomfort reserved for men who looked like trouble. Black leather sleeveless vests, heavy boots, full-sleeve tattoos curling over powerful arms, skulls inked deep into biceps, slicked-back hair shining under harsh floodlights. The patches on their backs read, "Hell's Angels," in bold, arched letters above a stylized phoenix, clutching an iron cross. To most people, they were a warning sign, a walking threat. But the way they moved told a different story. Calm, controlled, communicating with nods instead of shouts, watching each other's backs as naturally as breathing. They parked their bikes in a tight formation, engines growling down to a deep, steady idle that vibrated through the concrete. At the center of that formation sat Silas, the president. His vest was worn at the edges, the patch on his back cracked from years of weather. Full beard shot with silver, slicked back hair, eyes that had seen too much of the world and kept most of it to himself. On his left arm, beneath the leather, a skull tattoo grinned beneath a sleeve of inked flames and gears. Tucked in front of him on the massive motorcycle, held securely between his arms, was the one thing in the world that could make that man look soft. A 7-year-old boy named Leo. A small helmet rested in Silas's gloved hand, waiting to be buckled under Leo's chin. But for a moment the man just looked at his son, drinking him in as though memorizing every detail, every eyelash, every curl of hair, every blink. Doctors had called Leo deaf. They had flattened his future into charts and graphs, turned his father's questions into shrugging explanations. Words like profound hearing loss and unlikely improvement and he'll need to adjust to a silent world had sunk into Silas like stones. Sterile rooms had hummed with machines that never told the whole truth. But out here, on the cold edge of a highway, those doctors were miles away. Right now, there was only a father, his boy, and a road that never seemed to answer anything. Silas lifted the helmet, the leather of his gloves creaking softly, and leaned down so his beard brushed Leo's cheek. He didn't need words to speak to his son. In his chest, he thought, "We ride a little more, champ. You might not hear it, but I hope you can feel it. I hope you can feel that your old man is still trying." The headlight washed Leo's small face in stark, unforgiving white. It highlighted every contour, every shadow, and from across the lot, near the fuel pumps, someone was watching more closely than any doctor ever had. Maya's eyes locked onto the boy. not on the imposing man behind him, not on the leather or the tattoos, on the boy, on the way he didn't react to the engines, on the way he blinked just a fraction too slow when the headlight flared off a wet patch in front of them. Her gaze traced the side of his head, the angle of his ear, the way the light caught on something deep inside the canal. For a second, the beam of the bike's headlight struck just right, revealing a shadow where there shouldn't have been one. A strange, dull obstruction, almost buried but not invisible to someone who knew what to look for. Maya's heart clenched. It wasn't the first time she'd seen something like that. In another life, in another kitchen, she'd watched her little brother howling in confusion while adults argued about behavioral issues. It hadn't been a specialist that helped him. It had been a neighbor with a flashlight and a steady hand, gently pulling a wad of crumbling foam from his ear. The screaming had stopped. The endless confusion had softened into relief. That memory lived in her like a lit match she'd hidden in her chest, a tiny, stubborn flame refusing to go out. And now, as the cold seeped into her bones and hunger twisted her stomach, that same flame flared. "He's not deaf," her mind whispered. "He's blocked. It's the same. It has to be the same." A rational part of her screamed to stay put. These were bikers, huge, inked men who could end her night with a single word to the clerk inside. They could yell, they could chase her off, they could call cops or social workers, and Maya had learned the hard way that both could be as cold as the winter wind. But then she looked back at Leo, at the small boy sitting in silence on a mountain of chrome and steel. And for the first time in a long time, fear lost its grip on her. She moved before she could change her mind. Her feet splashed into a shallow puddle of half-frozen slush, soaking through the thin soles of her shoes. The cold bit up through her toes, but she kept going, hoodie flapping around her knees like a small gray flag. Silas had just started to shift his weight, ready to roll the bike forward to another pump, when a small figure darted into his path. Instinct kicked in, hand on the brake, boots digging into the ground as the heavy machine lurched, then steadied. Engines rumbled all around as other bikers turned their heads, eyes narrowing, senses sharpening. The girl was tiny up close, eyes too big for her thin face, hoodie swallowing her frame. She was shaking, not just from the cold, but from something deeper, the raw edge of terror and determination colliding. Her chest heaved as she sucked in air, trying to shout over the growl of the engines. "Don't put the helmet on him!" she screamed, voice cracking but fierce. "Please!" For a beat, the world held its breath. Gas pumps beeped in the distance. A car door slammed somewhere. But inside that circle of rumbling steel and leather, it was as if everything froze. Silas's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in hard assessment. He took in the hoodie, the shaking hands, the blue tinge at her lips from the cold. A homeless kid, a stranger, standing in front of his bike. Maya swallowed, as if hauling more courage up from somewhere deep inside. "Don't put the helmet on him, please!" she shouted again, voice raw. "I saw it when the headlight hit his face. There's something stuck deep inside his ear. He isn't broken, sir, he's just blocked. I can get it out right now. Please, just let me try." The words hit Silas like a punch he hadn't braced for. "He isn't broken." A stranger's voice, repeating the exact protest that had lived, trapped and useless inside his chest through every appointment, every shrug, every printout of test results. Around him, his brothers shifted. One biker with a shaved head and full-sleeve tattoos stepped half a foot closer, skull tattoo flexing on his bicep as his hand rested on the handlebar. Another, tall and broad, glanced from Maya to Leo, then to Silas, waiting for a signal. No one laughed. No one barked at her to move. They simply watched, calm, focused, engines growling like patient beasts. It was a strange standoff, fear and hope standing in the open, flanked by leather and chrome. And somewhere in the middle sat a little boy, oblivious to the battle being waged over the future of his hearing. For the first time that night, Maya stopped shaking. She had said the words. The plea was out in the open, hanging in the freezing air between her and the man who could choose to ride away and leave everything exactly as it was. Now, it was up to him. One by one, the Hells Angels shut off their engines. The thunder that had filled the lot receded, leaving behind a thick, humming silence, broken only by the hiss of the winter wind and the distant whoosh of passing cars. Without the roar of the bikes, Maya's breathing sounded loud to herself, ragged and uneven. They moved, but not the way she had feared. No one lunged. No one yelled. Instead, the bikers stepped off their machines and closed in, forming a loose wall of leather and muscle around her, not trapping, but sheltering her from the rest of the parking lot. It was like watching a flock turn inward to shield something fragile in the center. Silas swung his leg off the bike with practiced ease, boots crunching on scattered gravel and thin ice. He kept one hand on Leo's shoulder as he straightened to his full height, towering over the girl, beard catching the glow of the overhead light. Up close, his presence was immense, but his gaze was steady, not wild. "What did you say you saw?" he asked, voice low. Steady. No bark. No threat. Just hard focus. Maya's throat felt dry. This was the part where, in her past, the shouting usually started, but his tone forced her to breathe, to gather her courage into something coherent. "Your headlight," she said, forcing the words out. When it hit his face, it shined right into his ear. There's something in there, deep, like when someone stuffs foam or paper inside. It's not. I don't think he's deaf. I think he's blocked. Silas listened, each word scraping against memories he'd tried to bury. Sterile waiting rooms, white coats, the taste of cheap coffee that had gone cold hours ago as he stared at doors with authorized personnel only signs. Charts spread on desks like maps he couldn't read, lines and numbers and words like profound and irreversible. In those rooms he'd asked questions. Could it be something else? Something fixable? Something small? And every time, the answers had come back the same. He wanted to believe them. Needed to, in some broken way, because the alternative was too cruel. That there had been something simple, something overlooked, something a stranger's eyes could catch while all the experts stared right past it. Now this girl stood in front of him, shivering in a gray hoodie that had seen too many nights like this, insisting the impossible. "How do you know?" another biker asked quietly from Silas's left. He was tall, with a heavy beard and a sleeve of ink winding down his arm, a skull tattoo glinting as the wind toyed with his vest. His tone wasn't accusing, just curious. "My little brother," Maya said softly. "He used to scream all the time. They said he had issues, said he was wrong, that he needed pills. But one neighbor checked his ears with a flashlight and pulled out this wad of foam. He'd pushed it in to stop the yelling at home. After that, he got better, quieter. He could hear again." Her voice cracked, the memory raw. "I know what it looks like. I saw it, in your boy's ear." Silas felt something twist in his chest, tighter than any fear he'd ever known in a bar fight, tighter than the cold metal of a gun barrel years ago. This wasn't about his reputation. It wasn't about the club or how people saw the patch on his back. This was about the small boy sitting quietly on the bike, the boy who had never once flinched at the roar of his father's engine. He thought of Leo's confusion when people moved their lips and the world stayed silent. The way his son would press his palm against Silas's throat, feeling the vibration of his voice instead of hearing it. The small, furrowed brow when he watched other kids laugh at sounds he couldn't access. And then he thought of all the nights he'd driven home from the hospital, white knuckles on the bars, telling himself that at least he'd done everything. At least he'd gone to the best. What if everything wasn't enough, he thought. What if a stranger's courage, in a freezing parking lot, saw what no degree ever had? If you're wrong, he said slowly, voice low enough that Maya had to lean in to hear it over the wind. This could hurt him. And you. Maya nodded quickly, tears starting to gather at the corners of her eyes, freezing almost as soon as they formed. I know, she said. But if I'm right, and I don't say anything, he stays like this. Forever. And I can't just walk away. Please, just let me try. If it looks bad, you tell me to stop, and I stop. You stay right there. I won't hurt him. One of the bikers pulled out his phone, turning on the flashlight. Boss, he murmured, angling it just so. We can at least look. Silas's brothers weren't doctors. They didn't speak in long sentences about imaging and probabilities, but they trusted their eyes. They trusted what was in front of them, and they trusted their president to make the call. Silas inhaled slowly, tasting exhaust and cold metal, and the faint, clean scent of the boy's shampoo. He studied Maya's face. The fear, the determination, the kind of desperate courage he'd seen only in people with nothing left to lose. He realized something then. This wasn't just about Leo. The stakes wound through both of their lives like a tight, invisible thread. If he turned her away, he wasn't just risking his son's hearing. He was telling this girl that sometimes, even when you scream the truth into the cold, no one listens. And he knew that lie too well to let it stand. All right, Silas said, the decision clicking into place inside him like a locked bolt. We're not riding anywhere yet. You're sure? The bearded biker with the skull tattoo asked, glancing at Silas. It wasn't doubt. It was loyalty, making sure his president had truly chosen. Silas nodded once. If there's even a chance, he said quietly, eyes never leaving Maya's. Then we take it. We're not leaving my boy to silence if we don't have to, and we're not leaving her in this cold like trash either. They drew closer, shoulders forming a rough, weather-beaten wall against the biting wind, boots planted in a wide stance. From the outside, it probably looked like an intimidating huddle of Hell's Angels around a homeless kid and a little boy. From the inside, it felt different. It felt like a fortress. We'll use the light from the pump, another biker suggested. And my phone flashlight. Boss, you hold him. Kid, you tell us what you need. Maya's hands shook as she reached up to tuck a lock of hair gently away from Leo's ear. She spoke to him softly, even though she knew he might not hear a word. Hey, she whispered. It's okay. I'm just looking, all right? I'm trying to help. Leo didn't flinch. He watched her hands with the distant, curious focus of a child who had long ago learned to read the world through movement, not sound. His small fingers reached up, touching Silas's wrist as if to anchor himself. If we walk away now, Silas thought, chest tightening. And she's right. Then I've been letting my boy live in a prison that could have been opened. And if she's wrong, at least we tried. At least he'll know his old man never stopped fighting for him. Under the harsh, white light, the contours of Leo's ear came into sharp focus. Shadows deepened. Tiny ridges and folds stood out. And then, there it was. the shape Maya had seen from across the lot. A foreign dullness nestled deep, where there should have been nothing. "It's there," she said, voice barely more than a whisper. "It's really there." Around her, the bikers exchanged silent looks, unspoken questions passing between them like hand signals on the road. Could this be real? Had every specialist missed this? Was this child actually seeing what no one else had? Silas felt the weight of those questions pressing down on him, heavier than any leather cut. The stakes had never been clearer. If they did nothing, Leo stayed trapped in the silent world everyone had declared unchangeable. If they tried and failed, they risked pain, disappointment, and the shattering of a fragile hope. But if they tried and succeeded— "Tell me what you need," Silas said, voice low but firm. "We're here. We're not going anywhere. I promise you this, Maya. We won't ride off and leave you in the cold, and we won't leave my boy lost if there's a way out." Promises from adults had failed her before, but this one, spoken by a leather-clad giant with a skull tattoo and a phoenix patch on his back, felt different. It felt like something that might actually hold. Before we follow these Hell's Angels and this brave little girl into what happens next, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Stories like this, about leather-clad giants who choose to protect instead of intimidate, are what Gentle Bikers is all about. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Are you on a couch, a long-haul truck stop, or maybe listening in your garage while you wrench on your own bike? Let us know, and get ready. Because what Maya pulls from Leo's ear might just change everything. For a long moment, nobody moved. The winter wind slipped through the gaps between leather vests and chrome handlebars, carrying the faint smell of gasoline and stale coffee. The world outside the circle of Hell's Angels kept spinning. Cars rolled past on the highway, a neon sign flickered and hummed. But inside that ring of bikers, everything narrowed down to one boy, one girl, and one impossible chance. Maya stared into Leo's ear, the phone flashlight painting harsh white across delicate skin. The shadow deep inside wasn't a trick of the light. It was real. A foreign shape, dull and wrong, nestled where sound was supposed to slip through clean and clear. Her heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was the line. She had crossed out of hiding and into the open, straight into the path of men most people hurried to avoid. Now came the hard part, proving she wasn't just a scared, hungry kid grasping at hope. One of the bikers, Rook, tall, bearded, with a skull tattoo thick on his bicep, shifted his weight. "We've got a first aid kit in the van," he said quietly. "Cotton swabs, gauze, tweezers, maybe something we can use safer than guessing." Silas didn't look away from his son. His mind was a storm, years of medical jargon, test results, charts, and quiet despair churning under the surface. But through the noise, one simple truth rose like a flare. There was something in Leo's ear that did not belong. "Get the kit," he said, voice low, controlled. "Now." Maya wasn't a doctor. She knew that. Deep down, a small voice whispered that this was dangerous, that she should be telling them to go straight to an emergency room, to specialists with equipment and diplomas on the wall. But another voice, the one that remembered her brother's screams, the neighbor's steady hands, the sound of silence finally breaking, spoke louder. Sometimes the people in charge missed what was right in front of them. Sometimes the only ones who saw clearly were the ones nobody bothered to ask. "This is risky," she said quietly, forcing herself to look up at Silas. "You should take him to a hospital after this, no matter what. They need to check his ears proper, but I think I can get that thing out. I've seen it before. Silas studied her face. A child's face, yes, but not a stranger to pain. Hunger had carved its lines. Cold had reddened her nose and cheeks. But there was something fierce and steady in her gaze that he recognized from 100 late-night rides with his brothers, the look of someone who had already survived too much to be easily shaken. "We don't do stupid," he said quietly. "We do careful. You hurt him, we stop. You see anything you don't like, we stop. And when this is over, we're taking him to a hospital. Non-negotiable. No one watching this should try what we're about to do. This is our risk, our road." Maya nodded. He was including her in that we. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just a problem to be moved along. She was part of the solution. Rook brought the battered first aid kit, and they opened it on the seat of a nearby bike. White gauze, antiseptic wipes, cotton swabs, delicate tweezers meant for splinters. Maya's fingers hovered, then selected a single cotton swab and the tweezers. "We need something thin," she murmured. "And soft. I'm not going in far, just enough to hook it if it's loose." Rook tore open an antiseptic wipe and handed it to her. She scrubbed her fingers until they stung, then carefully wiped down the tweezers and the swab, stripping some of the cotton away so it wouldn't catch too much. Around them, the Hell's Angels stood like statues, patched backs forming a wall, full-sleeve tattoos coiling over tense muscles, skull tattoos catching the light with each small shift. They weren't barking orders. They weren't flexing. They were simply there. An immovable ring of focus and quiet support. Silas knelt beside Leo, bringing himself down to his son's level. He positioned the boy so the gas pump lights and the phone flashlight combined into a clean, bright cone aimed at the tiny ear. "Hey, champ," he murmured, voice low, rough with feeling. Leo watched his father's mouth move, familiar shapes he had come to understand as comfort even without sound. Silas took one of Leo's hands and placed it on his own chest, letting the boy feel the steady beat of his heart. "I'm right here," he thought. "Whatever happens, I'm not letting go." Maya moved in, heart pounding. "I'm going to touch your ear, okay?" she whispered to Leo. "If it hurts, you pull away. If you pull away, I stop. Promise." The air seemed to thicken. Even the wind held off as if the night itself were leaning in to watch. Maya's hand steadied as she remembered her brother's tear-streaked face, the neighbor's calm voice, the moment the blockage had slid free and her brother had gasped, eyes going wide at the sudden rush of sound. "Please," she prayed silently, "let this be like that. Just once. Let something be simple. Let something be fixable." The tip of the swab touched the outer edge of Leo's ear canal. He flinched, just a little, more from surprise than pain. Silas's hand tightened gently on his shoulder, grounding him. Slowly, millimeter by millimeter, Maya eased the swab inward, keeping the angle shallow, careful not to push. The shadow inside resolved into texture, a rough, irregular surface that did not belong there. She felt it before she fully saw it. A faint resistance, a soft give, like the edge of something old and brittle pressed against cotton. "Got you," she whispered under her breath. Carefully, she withdrew the swab, noting the angle, the spot where it caught. Then she brought the tweezers in, hands shaking so badly she almost pulled away. But Silas's calm presence beside her, the ring of silent bikers around them, held her steady. This wasn't just her fight anymore. The tweezers slid in shallowly, following the same path. She felt that same faint catch, the slightest edge of something that shouldn't be there. She tightened her grip, incredibly gentle, heart in her throat. Silas watched every micro-movement. Leo, he thought, if this works, you might hear my voice for the first time. And if it doesn't, he shut that thought down. There was no room for it here. Maya drew back, slow as sunrise, feeling the resistance give way. For a terrifying second, nothing moved. Then, with a tiny, almost imperceptible slide, the obstruction shifted. A small dark lump came into view, pinched between the tips of the tweezers, a wax-dusted, crumbled plug of old foam or rubber, misshapen and filthy. It looked harmless, pathetic even. But in that moment, in that circle of leather and chrome and held breath, it might as well have been a live grenade they had just disarmed. Maya stared at it, stunned. "It's real," she whispered. "It was really in there." Rook let out a low whistle. Another biker exhaled a curse under his breath, more disbelief than anger. Silas's eyes flicked from the plug to his son's face, searching for something. Anything. "That was in his ear?" one of them muttered. "All this time?" Maya nodded, voice unsteady. "It was blocking the canal. You still have to get him checked. They need to make sure there's no damage, but this is a huge piece of it." For a heartbeat, nothing changed. Leo stood there, head tilted, eyes darting between faces the way he always had, searching for meaning in expressions instead of sound. Then Rook, acting on instinct, snapped his fingers gently near Leo's other ear, the one that had never been labeled as the bad side. Leo didn't flinch, he rarely did. Rook hesitated, then moved to the freshly cleared ear, snapping again. Soft, careful. Leo jerked. It was small, just a sharp blink and a startled hitch in his breath, but it was different. His eyes flew wide, confusion flickering into something else, something raw, electric. "Do it again," Silas said hoarsely. Rook snapped once more, a little farther away this time. Leo's head turned toward the sound. Not to the movement, not to the hand, toward the sound. The world seemed to tilt. The faint pop of the snap echoed inside the boy's newly cleared canal, bouncing against pathways that had been muffled for longer than anyone knew. It wasn't crystal clear, not yet. It was distant, strange, like hearing through water. But it was there. Leo's mouth parted. He looked up at his father, eyes filled with a question he didn't have signs for. Silas's heart slammed into his ribs. "Leo," he whispered, the word tearing out of him before he could stop it. Years of quiet, of forced calm, of telling himself he had accepted the diagnosis cracked wide open in that single syllable. It wasn't planned. It wasn't measured. It was just a father's name for his son, raw and desperate. And this time, Leo reacted. The sound didn't arrive clean. It wasn't the rich, familiar voice Silas had heard in his own head for decades. To Leo, it was a blurred shape, a muffled vibration with edges, foreign and overwhelming. But it was more than vibration in his hand or chest. It was coming through his ear. The boy gasped, a small, choked sound, and clapped a hand over the side of his head as though trying to hold the new sensation in place. His chest rose and fell quickly, eyes brimming. "Easy, champ," Silas said, tears burning hot in his own eyes. He could see the overstimulation, the confusion, the way new input threatened to flood a system that had learned to function without it. He forced his voice to stay low, gentle. "It's okay. It's just me. It's just Dad." Leo blinked. The shape of the word Dad rolled through his newly opened ear like a distant drum. He didn't understand it yet, not fully, but something in his body recognized the pattern, the warmth inside it. His lower lip wobbled. Then he lunged forward, throwing his arms around Silas's neck in a fierce, clinging hug. Silas held on like the world was trying to take his boy away. His vision blurred as tears finally broke free, hot against the winter air. A man who had ridden through storms, through bar fights and back road dangers, now shook quietly in the middle of a gas station parking lot because his son had turned his head toward the sound of a finger snap. Around them, the Hells Angels looked away, not out of discomfort, but respect. Some wiped at their eyes roughly, as if the wind had suddenly gotten harsher. Others just breathed, deep and slow, letting the enormity of the moment settle into their bones. Maya stepped back, the dirty plug still pinched between the tweezers, her hand suddenly feeling very small, very empty. She had thought, somewhere in her fragile hope, that this might help. But seeing it, seeing a boy flinch at sound for the first time, shook her more than the cold ever could. "You did this," Rook murmured, looking down at her. "You serious little thing in a gray hoodie. You did what all their machines couldn't." Maya shook her head reflexively. "No, I just noticed. Anyone could have." "They didn't," Silas said hoarsely, still holding Leo, but turning enough to meet her eyes. His cheeks were wet, beard damp, but his gaze was steady, sharp. "They didn't. You did." Something shifted then. The cold was still brutal. Her hoodie was still thin. The plug in her hand was still filthy and small. But the way the men in leather looked at her changed. She wasn't just a stray kid near the trash cans anymore. She was the spark that had lit up a world everyone else had agreed would stay dark. "We're not done," Silas said, forcing himself back into the calm he wore like armor. "We still need doctors, real exams. We need to know if there's damage, and we need answers." The joy didn't erase the anger. It sharpened it, because now he knew, without question, that the specialists had been wrong. That somewhere along the way, someone had looked at his boy, at his charts, at the neat boxes on their forms, and decided that was all there was to see. "Maya," he said, voice low but deliberate, "you're coming with us." She blinked, startled. "What?" "No, I can't go anywhere. If they see me, they'll see you standing next to us," Rook cut in, stepping closer, the skull tattoo on his arm catching the light. "That changes things." Silas nodded. "You're the one who saw what they missed. You're our witness, our proof. You're not disappearing back into the cold after this." The decision rippled through the club like a silent command. They would not just ride off into the night, content with a small miracle no one could explain on paper. They would take Leo straight to the same system that had stamped him as deaf for life, and make it confront its own blindness. They moved with purpose. One biker carefully sealed the dirty plug inside a small plastic specimen jar from the first aid kit, as if handling evidence. Another grabbed a spare, thick hoodie from a saddlebag and draped it over Maya's shoulders, followed by a pair of gloves that swallowed her hands. "You ever ridden on a bike before?" Rook asked. Maya shook her head. "No." "You're about to," he said. "You'll ride behind me. You hold on, you stay low, and you let us handle the rest." Within minutes, the rest stop transformed from a frozen amphitheater of tension back into motion. Engines roared to life, one after another, the deep thunder rolling out across the parking lot, no longer just sound, but a declaration. This wasn't a gang on the move. This was a convoy with a purpose. Silas positioned Leo in front of him again, this time with a thick hat pulled gently over the boy's head, avoiding the freshly cleared ear. As the engine rumbled beneath them, he watched Leo carefully. The sound was too much, too soon. Leo stiffened, then clung to his father's arm with both hands, overwhelmed but still there, still connected. Silas eased back on the throttle, keeping the noise as low as he could. Baby steps, he thought. We're not trying to make up 7 years in one night. They rolled out of the rest stop and onto the highway. Cold air knifed past, but the convoy moved as one, headlights cutting through the winter darkness, patches gleaming on their backs. The hospital rose ahead like a block of pale light against the night sky. Glass, concrete, and 100 windows lit with sterile glow. It had been the scene of so many defeats for Silas that his stomach knotted just seeing it again. But this time, he wasn't walking in alone with a file folder and tired eyes. This time, he rode in with a line of black leather vests at his back and a homeless girl in a gray hoodie wrapped in borrowed warmth. They parked in a row near the emergency entrance, a living wall of chrome and steel. Nurses and visitors paused mid-step, eyes widening at the sudden congregation of Hell's Angels under the hospital lights. Security guards stiffened, hands hovering near radios. The air crackled with alarm, assumptions leaping to life. Trouble. Intimidation. Danger. But what stepped out from the center of that line wasn't a mob looking for a fight. It was a father holding his son's hand, and a little girl walking close beside him, partially hidden by a borrowed hoodie, clutching a sealed plastic jar like a fragile treasure. Inside, the lobby smelled of disinfectant and tired coffee. A receptionist glanced up, eyes widening as leather and tattoos filled the entrance. Her hand moved toward a phone, but Silas raised one palm, slow and calm. "We're here for follow-up on my boy," he said. "You've seen us before." She had. Her gaze flicked to Leo, then to the memory of a chart marked as profoundly deaf. "You'll need an appointment," she began. "Our ENT department is—" "Our appointment was last year," Silas interrupted gently but firmly. "You told us nothing could be done. Tonight, we pulled this out of his ear." He nodded to Maya, who stepped forward and placed the small plastic jar on the counter. The receptionist stared at the plug inside, brow furrowing. "What is that?" "What your specialists didn't see," Rook said quietly. "What this kid saw from a gas station parking lot." The woman's eyes flicked between the jar, Leo, and Maya. "I'll call an ENT on call," she stammered. "Please, just wait over there." As she picked up the phone with shaking hands, one of the security guards approached, posture tense. "You all can't just—" "We're here for medical follow-up," Silas said evenly, meeting the guard's gaze without flinching. "We're not here to cause trouble. We're not raising our voices. We're not making threats. We brought evidence, and we brought the kid who found it. We're staying until somebody explains how that was missed." The guard hesitated. There was something disarming about the sight of Leo holding his father's hand, about the way Maya half hid behind a biker's arm, about the quiet steel in Silas's voice. This wasn't a group looking for chaos. This was a family of a different kind, refusing to be dismissed. Minutes later, a man in a white coat stepped into the lobby, badge identifying him as Dr. Harrow. He recognized Leo almost immediately. His eyes flicked to Silas, then to the Hell's Angels patch, then to the jar on the counter. "Mr. Garrison," he said carefully, "you can't just walk in with—" "My boy turned toward a sound tonight," Silas cut in quietly. "For the first time in 7 years." The doctor froze. "We pulled that out of his ear," Silas continued. "A plug. Old foam, wax, whatever you want to call it. Your team told me there was no physical obstruction, that it was neurological or deeper. You remember saying that?" Dr. Harrow's jaw tensed, but he nodded. All tests at the time suggested. A homeless girl, Silas said, tilting his head toward Maya. Saw what you didn't. From across a parking lot. From the way a headlight hit his face. She risked getting run over by a bike, risked getting thrown off the lot, to tell me my boy wasn't broken, just blocked. Maya shifted under the doctor's gaze. So here's what we're not doing tonight, Silas went on. We're not shrugging. We're not filing this under interesting case and sending us home. You're going to examine his ears again. You're going to run whatever tests you need to run to see what's changed. And you're going to explain on paper how something like that went unnoticed when you told me you'd looked everywhere. The tension in the room was thick, but it wasn't the wild, crackling energy of a brawl. It was the slow, inexorable pressure of accountability pressing down on a man who had believed his first assessment would never be challenged. Dr. Harrow's gaze drifted to Leo. He reacted to sound? He asked, voice lower now. Rook nodded. Turned his head toward a snap right after that came out. Flinched at an engine too. He's overwhelmed, but he's hearing something. The doctor exhaled slowly. All right, he said. We'll take him back now. I want to examine his ears myself, and I'll review the old imaging. See what we missed. He looked at Maya again. You pulled that out? She shook her head. I just saw it. They did the rest. No, Silas said quietly. She's the reason we're here. Say that right. Dr. Harrow hesitated, then nodded. You're the reason we're here, he corrected. You were right to speak up. Whatever we find tonight, that took courage. Hospitals had a way of making time feel slippery. Minutes stretched, then snapped, looping back on themselves as fluorescent lights hummed overhead and distant intercoms crackled with someone else's emergency. Leo sat on the examination table, legs too short to reach the floor, sneakers kicking softly. Maya sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking, eyes flicking between Leo and the door. Two bikers stood by the door like quiet sentries. When Dr. Harrow returned, his face was different, less guarded, more solemn. We've examined Leo's ears thoroughly, he said, and we've reviewed his previous imaging. Silas rose slowly, every muscle in his body keyed to that tone. And? He asked. There was a significant obstruction in his left ear canal, the doctor said. The plug you brought in. Based on the condition and composition, it may have been in place for quite some time. All tests we ran then suggested we'd checked everything. But looking back now, it's clear. It was missed. That's on us. Anger rose in Silas like a tide. Years of, there's nothing more we can do, pressed against his ribs. But he shaped that anger instead of letting it explode. What does that mean for him? He asked. Not for your charts. For my boy. Dr. Harrow softened his tone as he looked at Leo. We've run preliminary hearing tests. With the obstruction removed, Leo is responding to sounds he didn't respond to before. Right now, it looks like he has partial hearing in that ear. How much we can recover with therapy, and time remains to be seen. But he's hearing, Mr. Garrison. Not perfectly, not yet. But he's hearing. The nurse gently rattled a small metal tray. Leo flinched, then turned toward the sound, eyes wide. His brows knitted together in confusion, then loosened as he tried to make sense of this new world. We'll schedule him with audiology, Dr. Harrow continued. He'll need repeat testing, hearing therapy, maybe assistive devices, but we're revising his file, officially. The diagnosis stands to be changed from profound deafness to partial hearing loss with significant recent improvement. Silas let out a trembling breath. So you're putting it in writing, he said, that you missed this. The doctor nodded. Yes, I am. There it was, the defeat of a villain that didn't have a face so much as a habit. The habit of assuming, of closing the file too early, of trusting systems more than eyes and hearts. It wasn't a dramatic arrest or a punch thrown in a parking lot. It was a line of text being rewritten in a digital chart because a little girl refused to stay invisible. You said we, Maya spoke up. But I'm not a doctor. I'm just... You are the reason we reopened that file, Dr. Harrow said. You noticed something no one else did, and you had the courage to speak up. That matters. Medicine fails when it stops listening to people like you. One of the bikers asked gently, You got somewhere to go, kid? Maya folded into herself. I'm fine, she mumbled. I manage. Silas looked at her. Really looked. How long you been managing? He asked softly. She shrugged. Long enough. Doesn't matter. It matters to me, Silas replied. He stepped closer, lowering himself to her eye level. You changed my boy's life tonight. Maybe more than you realize. I'm not leaving you on a sidewalk after that. Panic, confusion, and hope flickered across her face. Sometimes when people help, it gets worse, she said. I end up with papers and questions and places I don't belong. Silas nodded. What if this time you don't do it alone? What if we stand there with you? What if, when they see you, they also see us? The hospital had a social worker on call. She was cautious, kind-eyed, clearly thrown off by the sight of a homeless girl flanked by tattooed bikers and a solemn ENT doctor. She asked questions, the gentle kind, not the cold checkbox kind. Maya answered slowly, haltingly, about couch hopping, bus benches, and learning which places threw out food at what time. Every time her voice wavered, she felt a reassuring presence at her back, a leather sleeve in the corner of her eye, a quiet nod from Silas, a brief, curious look from Leo, who watched her lips move, trying to match shapes to the faint sounds now trickling into his world. By the end of the conversation, options had taken shape. Not a perfect storybook solution, but something real. A temporary placement in a supervised group home with a good reputation. A promise from the social worker that Maya wouldn't be shoved into a system without follow-up. And one more thing, negotiated quietly in the hallway between Silas and the social worker. We're not trying to interfere, Silas said. We just owe her, and we're not letting her vanish. You want to stay involved? She asked. We want to be a stable point, he replied. Visits, check-ins. A contact she can call that isn't a hotline. You can run checks, background, whatever you need. But you saw what she did tonight. She doesn't need to learn the lesson that courage gets you abandoned. In the end, the social worker agreed, with notes made and contact numbers exchanged. No back-alley deals, no bending of rules. Just an understanding that sometimes the village that shows up looks a little different than people expect. When they finally stepped back out into the cold night, the air bit at their cheeks, but it no longer felt like an enemy. The bikes waited in a neat line, engines ticking softly. Maya stood with Silas and Leo, wrapped in a warmer coat over the borrowed hoodie, a backpack with a few clean belongings on her shoulders. They'll pick you up here in the morning, Silas said. Group home van. We'll be here too. We want to make sure they know you aren't just some file they can misplace. You don't have to, she said. We know, Rook replied. That's why we will. Leo studied her face, then slipped his small hand into hers. The contact made her breath hitch. He doesn't talk much yet, Silas said. But he knows who showed up for him. Maya squeezed his hand gently. I didn't do it alone, she whispered. You all stayed. That's what family does, Silas said. Real family. Engines rolled back to life, not as a roar of intimidation, but as a steady, reassuring thunder. The sound made Leo flinch again, then adjust, head tilting, trying to sort the noise into something that made sense. He was at the edge of a brand new world, and it was loud and confusing. But he wasn't standing there alone. "We'll be back in the morning," Silas said to Maya. "We'll ride behind the van if we have to. Let them see us there when you walk in." Maya nodded, clutching her backpack strap. "Okay," she whispered. "I'd like that." Morning came slowly after the night that changed everything. The group home van pulled to the curb, plain and unremarkable. What met it at the entrance, though, was anything but plain. A line of motorcycles already idling in quiet formation, chrome-frosted, black leather sleeveless vests stamped with Hell's Angels patches, full-sleeve tattoos visible against the cold. The social worker and van driver saw the patches, the skull ink, the engines, and for a heartbeat the old story rose. Trouble, intimidation, risk. Then they saw Leo leaning into his father's side, squeezing his hand whenever a car door slammed. They saw Maya standing just behind Silas's arm, not hiding from him, but letting his presence buffer her from a world that had always told her she was easy to lose. None of the bikers moved to crowd the van. No one raised a voice. They simply stood there and made it very hard for anyone to pretend this girl was alone. When it was time, Maya turned to Leo. "You keep listening, okay?" she whispered. "The world's loud, but there's good stuff in it too." Leo didn't have all the words, but he understood enough. He hugged her fiercely. Then she faced Silas. "You don't have to come check on me," she said. "I know," he replied. "That's how you'll know we mean it. You see that number on the paper? That's mine. They'll have it on file, too. If you ever feel like you're disappearing again, you call. Day or night. We show up." It was a simple sentence, but it felt like a stake driven into the ground. She climbed into the van, backpack pressed to her chest, and looked back through the glass. The Hell's Angels stood there, engines idling, patches bright in the pale morning. Leo lifted his hand in a small, clumsy wave. She waved back as the van pulled away. In the side mirror, she saw something she'd never seen before on any of her other departures. A convoy. The Hell's Angels fell in behind the van. Not too close, not intimidating. Just present. A line of black leather and chrome escorting a plain white vehicle, carrying one girl who had spent most of her life unseen. It was a quiet promise written on asphalt. "We're here. We're watching. You're not faceless anymore." Months later, snow gave way to spring, then to warm summer. On the edge of town, in a gravel lot beside a low, weathered building, the Hell's Angels hosted a small gathering. No wild party, just grills smoking, patched vests draped over chairs, and kids darting between boots and bikes. Leo sat on a bench in the shade, a small hearing device nestled discreetly behind his ear, connected to the world in a way he'd never known before. The sound was still a lot. Too much some days. But with therapy, patience, and his father's steady presence, he had begun to sort noise into meaning. When another child dropped a metal toy, the clatter made him jump, then laugh. A year ago, he would have stared, puzzled. Now he reacted with startled joy. Silas watched from a few feet away, one hand around a coffee cup, the other resting lightly on the bench. He still looked like every stereotype: black leather sleeveless vest, Hell's Angels patch, full-sleeve tattoos, skull ink, weathered face. But if anyone listened, they'd hear the difference in his voice when he called his son's name, the way the other bikers spoke around Leo, not loudly to shake him, but clearly, respectfully, letting him set the pace of his new world. Near the gate, a small van pulled up. The familiar social worker stepped out, followed by Maya. She walked into the lot with a cautious smile, a clean shirt under a denim jacket, hair brushed back. She still moved like someone who counted exits, but something else sat on her shoulders now. The weight of belonging. The first person she saw was Leo. He spotted her a beat later and froze. Then, with the reactions of a boy who now knew what it meant to hear a name, he lit up. "Maya!" he called, the syllables thick but unmistakable. It wasn't perfect. It didn't have to be. It was sound shaped into her name by a boy who had once been left in silence. The word hit her like a warm fist. She laughed, choked, and ran to meet him, catching him in a hug that nearly knocked them both over. Silas watched them, something fierce and quiet settling behind his eyes. This wasn't charity. It wasn't a favor they'd done once and then forgotten. This was family. Built the way real family often is. Not by blood, but by the decision to keep showing up. Rook tipped his chin in Maya's direction. "Kid cleans up good," he said. "She was always good," Silas replied. "World just took a while to notice." That's the thing about heroes. The world has spent so long painting them in one shape that it forgets to look where they really are. It expects capes, bright colors, clean hands, spotless records, and polite smiles. But the night Leo heard his father's voice for the first time, the heroes didn't look like that. They looked like men in black leather sleeveless vests, full-sleeve tattoos snaking down their arms, skulls inked into biceps, faces carved by wind and miles and bad roads. They looked like a homeless girl in an oversized gray hoodie who knew how to read fear and hunger and ear canals better than most charts ever could. They looked like a social worker willing to keep an open mind, a doctor willing to rewrite a diagnosis, a van driver who didn't flinch when a convoy of Hell's Angels escorted his route. Heroes, it turns out, are less about what they wear and more about what they do when the world looks away. On that winter night at that lonely rest stop, Maya could have stayed in the shadows. The Hell's Angels could have written her off. The hospital could have doubled down on certainty. But that's not what happened. What happened instead was simple and quietly radical. A girl stepped into the path of 1,000 pounds of steel and faith in specialists and said, "You missed something." A club of men the world had labeled as danger shut off their engines and listened. A father decided his pride mattered less than his son's chance at hearing his name. A doctor chose to admit, on paper, "We were wrong." And once that door cracked open, light poured through it. Leo learned to sort the roar of an engine from the warmth of a voice. Maya learned what it felt like to sleep in a bed that would still be hers in the morning. The Hell's Angels learned that their sighs, their ink, their patches, everything that used to make the world cross the street to avoid them, could be turned into a shield instead of a threat. And maybe most importantly, all of them learned this. Family isn't just the people whose faces are in your old photos. It's the ones who show up when the road gets dark, who stand between you and the cold, who trade their time and their comfort to make sure you're not fighting alone. So the next time you see a pack of bikers roll into a gas station, black leather sleeveless vests gleaming under neon, skull tattoos flexing as they move, remember that looks don't tell the whole story. Somewhere in that formation might be a father who rode through years of quiet grief for a son the world had given up on. Somewhere behind those mirrored lenses might be a man who stood silent in a hospital hallway so a homeless girl wouldn't have to answer hard questions by herself. And somewhere, in the space between what people assume and what's really true. A kid like Maya might be watching, wondering if it's safe to speak up. When courage like hers collides with muscle and loyalty like theirs, villains don't always know what hit them, even when the villain is just a line in a file or a habit of not looking closely enough. Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear leather. And at the end of the day, blood or no blood, patches or no patches, the real difference in a life like Leo's or Maya's comes down to one simple thing. Family is who shows up.